and welcome to the mid-year book freakout tag. I don't know that I do this every year. I don't know who created it. I don't know anything about this tag. I just occasionally do this when I feel like having some random content in June about what I've read so far this year, which is what I'm doing. Just a list of questions, basically highs and lows of the year of book style. So I'm just gonna get into them. The first question is the best book you've read so far this year, and for me that is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I read Convenience Store Woman by her a few years ago and then kind of missed that she was continuing to publish and have works translated into English. So I read Earthlings this year, which it's not, the cover looks cutesy and sweet and fun. The book is not. Like, it is amazing. I adored it. She writes these really weird, dark, like realistic, but then like totally absurdist kind of stories, and this book is dark. There's a lot of cannibalism, there's a lot of stuff going on, but it hits so hard, and it was absolutely wonderful and stunning and just like utterly absorbed me the whole time. Like the kind of thing where you just are so into a book you forget you're reading a book. It's just kind of like real life at that point, and it took some turns. I adored it. It made me so happy. I don't know, it's hard for me to like parse through my 5 stars and pick one book, but like I didn't have this as an answer to any other question, which is what I try to avoid, so it's got to be Earthlings. It's largely just like about this young girl coming of age as she's like being sexually abused. She thinks she's an alien. It's how she copes with like the world. It's why she talks about Earthlings and how she's different than other people, but like it's so sad and it feels so real, and then it kind of takes a really dark twisted turn into just like eating people, and it was a lot, and I really loved it. Second question is best sequel you've read so far this year. I don't read many sequels. Like, I read largely standalone contemporaries, some other genres thrown in, but like most of what I read is standalones. I didn't have much to choose from. The only sequel that I think I really liked was Kisscut by Karin, which is the second book in the Grant County series, which is a thriller series about this doctor and her ex-husband who's the chief of police, and just kind of they're solving crimes and doing things. I also read Lord of the Rings and a Patricia Cornwell sequel. Didn't love either of those, so like this is the only one I enjoyed. I gave this 4 stars. I love the Grant County series. I love Karin Slaughter as a thriller writer. She's so dark, she's so gritty. I'm not gonna be like, this is my favorite thing I've ever read. It's not my favorite Karin Slaughter book by like a decent margin, but in terms of like the best sequels I've read this year, I think this is the only one that I've genuinely loved so far. This is just essentially about like the 2 main characters and then this awful detective they have, and they're all investigating this pedophile ring and things go wrong, and I don't know, like not my favorite of her plots. I think she let it get like a little bit away from her there, but it was still like really good. I love the characters, so loved it. The best new release you haven't read yet. I tried really hard. I always fail on this question because I just don't keep up with new releases. I don't read a whole lot of new releases. I kind of just pick up things when like I'm into them. And I'm sure there are books that have been released this year that I'm like, oh, that sounds really good, I want to read that at some point, but there's nothing that comes to mind. The only thing I have that like is a new release for the year that I haven't read yet is actually an arc that I have that comes out July 19th. It is The Fallout Family, Wasteland, Woes. It's by Isaac Cooke-Khan. It's a middle grade dystopic book about like this brother and sister and their dog as they're like traversing this apocalyptic world. That's all I know about it, and that is the only thing on this list. It technically hasn't come out yet, but like I have the copy of it that I need to read, so I'm counting that. I'm really looking forward to it. It sounds like a wonderful story. New release for the second half of the year is literally the same answer I always give for this question. Karin Slaughter releases a book every year, usually like late summer, early fall. She and Lisa Gardner are the only 2 authors that I really like consistently keep up with every year. And Lisa Gardner, as far as I could tell, has not released or announced any new books. So she's taking a much deserved break, I think. Karin Slaughter has a new one coming out in the next few months sometime. I'm not exactly sure when, but it is the next installment of the Will Trent series. I don't know what it's called. I'm excited for it. I love the Will Trent series. Like, that is my favorite thing that she's done, apart from the Grant County series, and they're like related. I've read literally all of the Will Trent books. I plan to read all of the Grant County books this summer, like before that book comes out, so that like I'll read that and be fully caught up on her. But that's the only thing that like I'm aware of that's coming out that I really, really want to read. Biggest disappointment of the year. Mine is, I was torn. I was really torn. I want to like give a shout out to Endless Love by Scott Spencer, just because I've hyped that book up in my mind for so long. It wasn't bad. Like, it was a fine book. There were lots of things I enjoyed about it, but it just like, after all of the hype that I had for it, just like myself, like no one else hyped this for me. I was just like so down for this book. I wanted it to be like 5-star amazing, and it was like a 3-star decent read, but I'm probably going to unhaul it because like I'm never gonna think about it again. Like, I spent way more time thinking about it in the years leading up to my reading it than I ever will again. But I feel like the most disappointing thing is Last Call by Warren Adler, which is my only 1-star of the year so far. And I had really high expectations for that book. It's a contemporary book that is a love story between this elderly couple. This man is like, I forget their ages, late 80s, I think. They're both in their late 80s. His wife died a few years previous, and he meets this woman who's like the same age as him at a dog park, and they kind of get to talking and falling in love, and like things are going well, and then he finds out that she's actually not a widow. Her husband is still alive. He has Alzheimer's, and she's his primary caregiver. And like, I was so excited for that book. Like, I thought it sounded really, really wonderful, and it was just like awful in every capacity. Just like, I have nothing positive to say about that book. Like, the romance was really poorly done. It was so fast-paced. It was like there was no development of the characters or their relationship. Like, I didn't care about them. There was a lot of anti-Semitism, on purpose. The author he passed away. He was Jewish, so like the anti-Semitism was part of the story, but it was really poorly handled and just kind of like glossed over. And I don't know, there was a lot of like really graphic sex scenes that were really like fetishy vibing in like not a good way. Like, it didn't fit with the characters. It was just sort of uncomfy. Like, I don't know, like the whole book was just like so bad, like literally every element of it. And then there was this whole like weird elder sex abuse subplot that was like really never addressed at all, and it was like everything about that book was awful. And I don't know, like I really thought like that had the potential to be like a favorite for me for the year, and like the longer I was reading it, the more I was just like, no. My biggest surprise of the year is definitely These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall. This is a young adult horror novel that was recommended to me by Spines and Spoilers. I was reading this for my 12-book project, where I read 12 books that have been recommended to me by 12 people on here, mostly, throughout the year. And this was for that. And I was very, very nervous for this book because it's a young adult horror novel and like supernatural horror at that. And I was like, oh no, like I really love watching Spines and Spoilers. I really love talking to them. And I was like, I want to love this book that you love, and I don't think I'm going to. And then I read the book and it's so amazing. Like, it's so wonderful. Like, the characters of it were amazing. And like the themes, like thematically, it was just gorgeous. And like by the time it got to the end and like the point, it was so, so wonderful. I loved it. Like, the whole like final third of the book was absolutely breathtaking. Like, I couldn't put it down. I didn't want to stop reading it. Like, that book blew me away. I don't think that book has made me a horror lover. I think this was just like an amazing book that worked really well for me. But it's the first time I've ever like truly enjoyed supernatural horror, like let alone loved it. So I don't know, that one took me by big surprise. Favorite author, I have to go with Kate Alice Marshall. Like, looking at the books I've read this year and like the authors that I've read this year and who I've enjoyed, I've read Sayaka Murata before, I've read Karin Slaughter before. The nonfiction books I've loved this year, I don't really feel attached to those authors. Like, the only author I've read this year where I'm like, I desperately need to read more of their work was Kate Alice Marshall. So I love These Fleeting Shadows, and I would really, really like to see what more she's done, because I've heard really great things about some of her other books too. Favorite new character, this is a hard one for me, because I do read a lot of standalones, a lot of contemporaries, a lot of like lit fic, historical fiction type stuff, and there's just not a whole lot of characters that like stick out to me long term in like a fandom-y sense. So like, it's like I really enjoyed them while reading the book, but like I don't feel super like, I love this character. The only one I can really think of is Jeffrey Tolliver from the Grant County series by Karin Slaughter. He is the chief of police. He's the ex-husband of Sarah Linton, who is the town pediatrician slash coroner, which is an interesting combination. And I don't know, he's like an awful person. Like, I love to hate him. I love to hate all the characters in that book, but unfortunately, he's the only one I can actually choose, because the rest of them make appearances in the Will Trent series, which I read, and he's the only one who doesn't. And I know why he doesn't. So I'm very spoiled for the Grant County series, but I'm very excited to get to the end of it. But I'm really, I don't know, I'm weirdly attached to him, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. A book that made you cry. I cry a lot, but honestly, I was looking at the books I've read this year, and not many of them have made me cry. Like, I've cried some at a number of books. Like, I cried at Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Like, I got all teary-eyed, some tears fell out, like, that happened. And it's like, that's a very, like, bittersweet, charming book that I want to read more of. But the only book that's made me, like, cry hard this year was These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall. The ending of this book, I was just like, tears were just like pouring down my face, which was super fun because it was like midnight and I was supposed to be asleep, and I was reading by my book, like trying not to make noise and disturb anyone else in the apartment. So I was just like quietly sobbing while I'm reading this beautiful book. But that's definitely made me cry the hardest. And then a book that made me happy was Girl Sleuth, Nancy Drew and the Women Who Created Her by Melanie Rehak. This is a nonfiction book about Nancy Drew and like the creation of Nancy Drew, and like sort of biographical of the two women who were her primary ghostwriters and like kind of controlled her character. It was really dense, it was really interesting. There was a lot of like historical context and like what went into making this character, like not just like the individual choices involved, but like the societal expectation of women, like throughout the early 20th century to the mid 20th century, and like the revisions that the character went through and like the different takes on her. And it was just like, I loved Nancy Drew as a kid, so it was like reading all this like behind the scenes information about her and like the people involved in creating her was super interesting. Loved this. It was a great time. The most beautiful book that I've obtained this year, I've been trying not to buy many books, and I've succeeded for the most part. Because I have genuinely been trying so hard not to buy many books, and most of the books I buy are from like thrift stores, so I'm not getting like beautiful, gorgeous editions. But like the prettiest one I have is Skinship by Yoon Choi. It's just like super minimalist. I like the black, I like the gold, I like the font, I like the people on the cover. It's a short story collection. I haven't read it yet, but I think it's Korean American. That's like all I know. But I kind of saw it at the thrift store and was like, I don't know, it's aesthetically pleasing to me. And then the final question is, what books do you still have to read this year? A lot. So many. Like literally so many. I have so many different TBRs. I have the 12 book project I've been doing that I mentioned earlier. I still got 6 books in that include like Exhalation by Ted Chiang and O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker. I have my backlist TBR project, which I have not read many of those books, and that includes like Kennedy by Ted Sorensen, The Looking Glass Wars by Frank Better. I had a project I've been doing where I was giving authors a second chance, and I was reading that for a vlog that I started in January. I had 5 books on the list, and I still have 2 left, so I've got to read those. I'm trying to read like all the books that I've acquired this year, which is like 13 books. There's a lot on my list. Like, it goes on and on and on. And I'm trying to get through the Grant County series this summer too. I'm reading They're There by Tommy like so many books. And countless books. So, yes. I don't know. Like, I could probably pick a couple, but like there's just so many that like I really can't. So, this was the mid-year book freakout tag. Fun times. Thank you for watching. I've done full book reviews on at least one of these books. I think just one. I'm trying to look at my list of everything I mentioned. I think I've just done a book review on These Fleeting Shadows. So I will link that review down below. Go check it out. I highly recommend that book. It was beautiful. I highly recommend Earthlings. If you can get through like the trigger warnings of that, I highly recommend looking up the details of all those trigger warnings, because that book was a lot. And the cover does not really kind of convey that very well. But it was also a really wonderful book. So let me know if you've read any of these down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.